First things first, let's get our file set up. I'll just start out with a default scene here, but since we won't need the camera and the light for a pretty long time, I'll just go ahead and delete those. So we'll just start out with the default cube. Now I have a blueprint from our concept artist Paul, and he did a great job of coming up with this concept. What I'd like to do now is pull this into Blender so that we can model right on top of it. That'll make our lives a lot easier. So to do that, we just need to go to Shift A, go down to Image, and choose Reference. You could either choose Reference or Background. They're basically the same thing with slightly different settings, or you could also go to Empty and Image. They all do pretty much exactly the same thing. But I'll just choose Reference, and this image will come with the source files included with the course. So go ahead and navigate to that in the References folder, and click Load Reference Image. Now it'll load this image in as an empty, and we can hit G to move it around. And I don't really want it all tilted like that, so I'll just hit Alt-R and clear that rotation. I'll also go into Side View here, and place it below our cube, somewhere around there. Now what we need to do is figure out exactly how big our reference image should be, so our model will end up being the correct size. I looked up the dimensions of a old school Game Boy, and found that it was about 5.8 inches tall. This won't be exactly the same size as a Game Boy, but it might be a good place to start. So let's select our cube here, and for whatever reason we can't actually see our total overall dimensions here in the Object Transform properties, but we can see that in our sidebar. So I'll hit N to open up our sidebar, and under Item, Transform, we can find our dimensions. Even though our scene is set to metric units, we can still type in inches, and it'll translate it just fine. So if we go to our y-axis to input the height, since we'll just make this lying down, I'll type in 5.8 IN for inches, and hit Enter. Then it has a width of 3.5 inches, so I'll type in 3.5, and this time I'll just use a double quote for the inch symbol. That'll work too. And then for the z-axis, that'll be the thickness, and that is 1.3. And again, I just looked up Game Boy dimensions on Google, and this was the first result. And since that sounds about right, let's just go with that. So now we have a much smaller object here, and we can line up our schematic accordingly. I'll hit 7 to go to top view here, and move this around and scale it down. Zoom in. And first, let's just line up the thickness. I can't see it behind our object here, so I'll hit Z and go to wireframe view. Oh, and one note about that, I am using the extra shading pie menu option. So let's go to Edit and Preferences, and under Key Map, I have extra shading for pie menu items turned on, as well as Tab for pie menu. So those are my only two things that are different from the defaults, but I find them really helpful. So that just means I can swipe up to toggle on overlays, or swipe down to do X-ray. And then when I hit Tab, it'll give me a list of all of the different available modes. But for now, let's just transform our background image into place. I'll use G to move, S to scale, and try to get that just right. I don't think it needs to be super exact, but something pretty close. Then once I have that, let's select our cube, hit Tab to go into edit mode, and then I'll just box select these top vertices, hit G and Y to pull them down along the Y-axis, and select the bottom vertices, G and Y again to pull them down. Then I'll hit Tab to go to object mode. So now our cube is roughly the right size for our object here, and it's really small, and our view is a little bit off, so I'll hit period on the number pad to zoom right to it, and that kind of just resets our view. We can also pull up our reference image up on the Z-axis a little bit, just so it's not super far away. And now we can use this cube to line up the rest of our reference images. So first I'll select our first reference, and I'll just name that reference top, since that's what we want to see when we're in top view. But now I'll duplicate that. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, pull that up along the Z-axis, and now I want to line up the back view. But it's kind of facing the wrong way, and if I go to top view here, then it's also blocking our cube. So there's a couple things that we need to do. First is we need to make sure that we're only seeing this from one direction. That way when we're above it, we'll see straight through it, but we can still see it from below. To do that, we need to select our reference empty, go down to the empty properties, and set the display side to front. Now we can only see it from the front side. Now this one is facing the wrong direction here, and you'll notice that because our little cutout here is facing opposite of our top view. And now let's flip it by rotating it 180 degrees. So R 180, and I'll do it on the Y-axis. So now when we're in top view, we're not going to see it, but when we're in bottom view, which we can get to by either going to the -Z on our navigation gizmo, or we could use the hotkey Control-7. Okay, so we can't see it yet because we still need to set this reference image to show through from the bottom. So let's select that one, go to Display, Side, and Front. Okay, now we can go to Control-7 and see our bottom reference. I'll name it appropriately in the outliner, Reference Bottom. Make sure that's the one that's selected, and then just hit G and X to move it along the X-axis, and move it into place. Alright, now that we have that, then we can pretty easily set up the other sides as well. I'll just take the bottom one, go to Side View, Shift D, rotate this 90 degrees, and it looks like it rotated it the wrong way, so I'll just hit the negative on my number pad to flip it the other direction, and then hit Enter. And actually, it doesn't look like we have something from front view. There's not really a whole lot to look at, so we don't really need it there. So actually what we need to do is move this along the Y-axis to the other side, and then rotate it 180 degrees along the X or Y-axis. Then if I go to back view, which is the Y-axis here, I can hit G and Z and move that into place. Okay, so we can see inside the cartridge hole there. And then to make the side, I'll take the bottom one again. Let's go to front view, Shift D, rotate it 90 degrees negative, Enter. And then let's see, this one is from the opposite of side view, so let's hold Control and hit 3. And we can kind of tell which one's which because of which buttons are in front of the others. So we can tell that if we're looking from this side, then we're going to want the D-pad to be in front of the buttons. So it's going to be this bottom one. So I'll just hit G and Z and move this up. And you'll notice that this one isn't lined up perfectly, even though the top view and bottom view is, and I wouldn't really worry too much about that. Again, as long as it's pretty close, then we'll be okay. Alright, so now let's do the last one here. I'll go to front view, Shift D, move this over, rotate 90 degrees, and this time I'll hit 3 to go to side view, and then hit G and Z, and move this up. Alright, so now all of our reference images are in place, but I probably won't want to see them all the time, and I definitely don't want to accidentally select them when I'm working with my objects. So what I'll do is place them in a new collection. I'll go to my scene collection here, and select it to make it the active one, click New to make a new collection inside of it, and double click it, and I'll just rename this References. Then I'll rename my references to something that make a little bit more sense. So we have Reference Back, Reference Left, and Reference Right. Though it's the reference for the right, but it's on our left, so it could be a little bit confusing. You could flip the naming. It doesn't really matter too much, as long as it makes sense to you. Alright, so once we just shift and selected that whole list and dragged them into the references, now I can very easily turn them off all at once. Another thing that I want to do is make sure that they're not selectable in the viewport. So I'll go to my outliner filter properties, and just turn on the little pointer icon for the restriction toggles, and now I can just turn off selection for this whole collection all at once. So now I can work with my objects and box select whatever, and they won't accidentally be selected. Just to keep things tidy, I'll name the first collection Console, that'll be our little game console, and I probably won't need the grid too much here, so we could turn it off. We could go to our overlays and just turn off floor and X and Y axes. But if you do want the grid, then I'd recommend probably scaling it a little bit, because right now it's really, really big. So we could just go to 0.01 or 0.001, something like that. So we actually have a little bit more of a grid to work with, but we probably won't be using it. We don't really need to snap to it or anything. So I'll just go ahead and turn it off. Now we're just kind of floating in 3D space here. And lastly, since we're working on such a small scale, and our units are set to meters at the moment, if I just take something like this small object here and hit G and move it along the X-axis, let's say 2. Well, it's going to move really, really far away because it's moving it 2 whole meters. But I'd rather work in smaller increments. So I'll go over to my scene properties, down to units, and switch the length from meters to centimeters. Now when I hit G, X, and 2, that makes a little bit more intuitive sense. So that's all the setup that we need to do, and in the next lesson, we'll start modeling.